Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Novogratz, and this is Next with Novo. All right, friends, another episode of Next with Novo, and today, actually, Novo's the guest. I'm kind of kidding around about that. I've got my head of research, Alex Thorn, who is a deep in the weeds crypto enthusiast, and we decided we'd have a conversation trying to help decipher the state of the world here in the crypto sphere. It has been a brutal few months, and so I'm going to pass it to Alex to kind of run the conversation and try to shed as much light as we can.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I think we're calling this segment the State of the Union, maybe the state of our markets. I think it'll be a good, quick conversation on sort of where we are in a market cycle, how macro and crypto are interacting. And I just want to kick it right off with the first question, which is from your perspective. You're a longtime investor and builder and a longtime follower of markets. Can you set the backdrop for what markets look like for us today, just broadly speaking? I mean, even outside of crypto, and where is all this pressure coming from?
Yeah, I was being interviewed and I started singing from Beauty and the Beast. Tale as old as time. I wish I had a better voice. This is a tale as old as time. We had a asset bubble fueled by the Fed. And if you were Shopify or Zoom or Spotify or you name it, any growth stock, Peloton, people jumped on the story and there was a speculative mania. The same happened in luxury watches, in baseball cards, basketball cards, and in crypto. And Bitcoin as the lead horse, traded as high as 69,000. But lots of other cryptos took off. And I remember when COVID started, I said, it's a perfect tailwind for crypto because you've got Bitcoin as this unique digital asset, 21 million Bitcoins, and it is a perfect salve to printing money, right? Bitcoin is a hard money ethos that was based on Satoshi's fear of populism, and we had populism, pay for everything. And I thought we also had the digitalization of everything, right? Microsoft CEO famously said we were doing more in 4 months than we thought we'd do in 2 years, or something to that length. Right. And so the stories were really powerful and people bought in and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so when the Fed got hawkish, when Powell finally got reappointed, Ray Powell stayed dovish far longer than he should have, wanting to get reappointed. Human frailties, I guess, or foibles, right? People love to hold on to power. And then he decided he needed to save his reputation and needed to save the economy from raging inflation and got very hawkish. We have an inflation problem in the U.S. and abroad. It's starting to crack. But as he was removing liquidity from the markets, all assets started to fall. NASDAQ, growth stock, and crypto started to fall. I this whole year thought crypto Bitcoin could hold a 30,000, 50,000 range. And where I say tale as old as time, when we got down to 30,000, first because of the UST, that caused credit. We had this collapse from 30,000 to 19,000, where we are today. And that was the tale as old as time, is that the CeFi players in crypto, Celsius, BlockFi, Three Arrows, Genesis, big balance sheets, had taken far more leverage than I think people understood. And you had a credit crisis. And that credit crisis impacted every player, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it dented confidence. I got a call yesterday from a wrestling friend who had lost lots of money in crypto and then was like, but all my coins are at Celsius. I'll get my coins back, won't I? And I was like, I'm not positive, but my gut feeling is you'll get nothing back for the next 3 years, and then you'll get 20 to 30 cents on the dollar back. And that's where we are today. We are, I think, 70, 80%, 90% through the deleveraging process. I think there are some big counterparties that still need to get recapped. Knock on wood, you're seeing FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried recapping BlockFi, and so those consumers won't lose their money. And there's keep some confidence in the system. Celsius, like I said, I think will file. I don't know factually. Putting up the gates is almost the same thing as filing Chapter 11 in some ways.
Yeah.
And we'll see the rest. I don't want to speculate on rumors on who's going to do what, but it feels like the big guys that need to get capital will, because they have other businesses that are sustainable. And that should take the panic out of the system. And then it takes a while to rebuild narrative, rebuild confidence. Ironically, crypto worked pretty well, right? DeFi worked, people got liquidated, it was transparent. There were a few blemishes, right? Bancor tried to change the rules on their impermanent loss feature.
Solend on Solana.
Yep. But for the most part, most of the protocols did what they were supposed to. And the irony is it was the non-transparent, traditional companies on top of crypto that got way over their skis. And, that's a price for the whole community to pay. It's a little bit like when Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Merrill Lynch got way off sides in mortgages, the more conservative investment banks still also got hammered, right?
Yeah.
Everyone needs to pull money back, confidence breaks down. Unlike traditional finance, we don't have a lender of last resort. There is no Fed for crypto. And what's promising is money from outside our space is coming into these bailouts. You saw Goldman Sachs trying to raise a distress fund. I think that'll be a good business. And so that we need that money coming into the space to put a floor on the prices. And then we need new narrative. And that narrative, I think, will be the Fed flinching because you're seeing the economy collapse right now. And we're going to be in a recession faster than you can shake a stick. That will hopefully, have the Fed flinch and pause. And I think that gives Bitcoin its narrative.
You think Bitcoin leads the way, at the point of a Fed flinch or pause?
100%. I really do. I don't care if you're a Bitcoin maximalist or an Ethereum junkie. We all got to cheer for Bitcoin right now, because without Bitcoin going up, I think the confidence in the rest of crypto is going to be more shaken. Even though in the long run they might have very little to do with each other, right now they are conjoined twins. And Bitcoin has the bigger community and the simpler story. Right? The story of Bitcoin really is a macro bet against debasement of currency. We might have Lightning become a payment network, and that'll give it some utility. I actually think, quite frankly, Lightning makes it more confusing. I think it's a macro bet on the debasement of currency. That's just a simple story. It's digital gold. And that story has been sold. People believe it. There is a community of people that are willing to work really hard to sustain. And so I kind of think Bitcoin's easier. The rest...
Yeah, I think it clearly has it. Well, that's what I was going to ask. Bitcoin has a very clear function. It works as advertised today. It feels like most of the rest of the space is still sort of in early phases, development phases, which is okay and good. What else are you excited about outside of Bitcoin?
Well, listen, I think the rest of the space,
when it's time to get excited again,
has been a venture bet, and it's playing out to work. I think there's three real buckets that you can think about, right? They're payments. Listen, in the U.S., Apple Pay and these other things work pretty damn well. So there's not this need for a better electronic payment system. But anything abroad, sending money abroad, remittances, none of it works, right? And so I think there's a big role for crypto in payments. And we'll see stable coins, Bitcoin. My guess is it's a stable coin system, but we'll see. I think the big use case that will hopefully lift up blockchains was a continuation of what we saw last year, which was unique digital assets on a blockchain, right? Satoshi gave us private property on a blockchain, and now we can have unique digital art, unique digital signatures, unique digital characters, unique digital experience in a metaverse, in a block, And as the world becomes more and more meta, we spend more and more time on screens and on phones. Listen, I could be wearing a, Kanye West designed Gap Adidas collab, digital jersey that I bought for, 2 Bitcoin because it was from Kanye West in the future.
Right.
And
I mean, this is kind of the metaverse right now, you and I. I mean, I'm not in the office with you, and this feels pretty digital to me.
we are in the metaverse. And so
Yeah.
you're going to have, but you're wearing normal clothes. Like we could be in the metaverse and we could be in like cool digital clothes, or our avatars could be talking. And so I think
Right.
that expansion. Now, what happened last time? That story, the story of the metaverse, the story of NFTs, the excitement around the gambling mania. NFTs were investments, and they were gambling mania around it. That created the narrative to get Solana and all the other layer 1 blockchains rolling, right? Because we finally had a use case for, the killer app for blockchains was NFTs, and probably is NFTs for a while. There weren't sustainable long-term communities built around things other than the gambling. We were starting to see it. You see it with Bored Apes, right? That's a community. They're not going away. But they were smaller communities. Even if you would go on, Sandbox or Decentraland, hundreds of thousands of users, not hundreds of millions. And I think what you're going to see next is big media platforms, gaming platforms. So you're going to see these bigger communities, and I think you'll see faster adoption. Listen, all 110 million of iHeart's users aren't going to show up there in their metaverse concerts, but you're going to get much quicker transition, is my guess.
Yep.
And so I think what will lead us out in terms of use case is probably unique digital assets in media, gaming. It doesn't mean DeFi's dead by any stretch. I think, quite frankly, DeFi has to grind through this regulatory world, but I was wildly impressed at how Compound and Aave and all the rest of them worked during this crisis, right? The other thing I think is going to change, and I haven't completely sorted this, is we have a lot of tokens, governance tokens for Uniswap, for instance, around awesome protocols where the governance token is wonky or janky. A lot of times it was janky because they were trying to figure out how to not be a security token and make it a utility token, but also try to give some economic incent to the user. And my guess is the world will demand a cleaner link between, like there's a perfect use case for a decentralized exchange like Uniswap, which you can trade anything on, and that if I own part of that network, I should get some of those fees directly. Does that feel like a security token? Maybe. And maybe we just need another lane in regulation for decentralized security tokens. But we shouldn't stop awesome innovation because of regulation. We should get regulation to be effective and efficient around awesome innovation.
I love your point about security tokens as sort of an end state or the next development of governance tokens, because you're totally right. In my research and evaluating the space, most of the governance tokens convey very little value to their holders, right? And that is because if they do, then it's perhaps yielding an income, and it's a dividend, it's a payment from the efforts of a third party. I think we'll get there, though.
We have to get there.
Security,
otherwise this whole thing is going to be, because I think about it, I don't want to pick on CZ because he's CZ and he's made more money and made more innovation in this space than just about anybody. But if you think about his token, right? Which he paid his employees in, which is actually miraculous. You don't really get any of the profits of Binance. He burns them if Binance does well. I thought about like Novo token. And I was thinking Novo token, if you own one of the 100,000 Novo tokens, you can come to the office and I can give you a kiss once a month. And most people probably wouldn't want to come to the office and give me a kiss, just like most people don't use his tokens for discounted fees. Maybe my wife would show up for like a month or two and then she'd probably even get bored. But if Galaxy did well, we'd burn Novo tokens, and Novo's on TV a lot, and so people get excited and they think they're investing in Novo, and it goes up. When in reality, it has nothing to do with the profits of Galaxy. Like
Right.
that's kind of what got done with a lot of these tokens, and it doesn't have, to me, have long-term sustainability. It just doesn't.
Yeah, a lot of them are really, weak pseudo equity at best, right? And it, I think the value can really accrue and also be more useful if there is some actual,
And it doesn't mean there's not
protection,
utility token. There can be
disclosure,
great
ownership.
utility. There can be great utility,
Right.
access to something, but it's got to be utility that people actually use and value. And so I think that will be necessary for our industry to march forward.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be a great business in, and no one's done this brilliantly yet. There are a few businesses that do it well, but there's not enough expertise around that.
Fascinating. All right, a couple other questions. I wanted to ask about. I've got a few more, but I think you touched on CeFi and DeFi. I think a bit, but I wanted to ask, given the 6 months that we're 6 months through the year, we're down, big from all-time highs in crypto. I mean, we're down. I think the Nasdaq 100 is down over a third
Yeah,
from
but I
its
think
all-time high.
crypto feels like it's down 80%. If you
Yeah,
put it all
it
together.
is, and
But that's a tremendous beatdown.
yeah, it is. But you founded Galaxy at the end of 2017, sort of right at the
Yes.
right after the top of the last
Yeah.
bubble, and built through that. There wasn't nearly as much private capital looking to allocate in startups and in private equity back then. I know I was doing venture in this space during that period. But there's a lot, it looks like, of still dry powder this
Yeah.
time around. What does the private market side in your mind feel like? Like, is that gonna
So listen, like
is that good? There's a lot more building that can happen.
we survived crypto winter last time because we were small. We hedged our book really, really well. And so while the market was down 95%, we were down like 30. And that gave us the ability to survive. And so I think you'd have two kinds of companies that didn't lose all their resources. Hedge funds that are down 30% will survive. Hedge funds that are down 80% won't survive, most likely. And so the difference between this time and last time is the industry was so much bigger, right? We were 4 times the size. And the good part about that is lots got built, right? In this COVID bubble, a lot of talent came in, a lot of projects got built, a lot of innovation happened. That's all good. That's not going away. But I think it's going to be a bigger bloodletting of people losing jobs, of projects not, hedge funds, other projects not succeeding. And so there's going to be a lot of musical chairs. I don't think it stops the industry from growing, but I think the dislocation is going to be more painful than it was last time.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of dry powder on the sidelines. Any one of their advisors, coaches, seasoned investors would be like, dudes, sit on your hands. You might be buying, you might be putting a convert into a busted round from amazing companies. I mean, I think not one of the companies that got funded in the last 4 months of 21, first 2 months of 22, I don't think will not have a restructuring where the pref investors, get crammed down everyone else in the next round. And so there's going to be a business really in private restructurings. And there's not a lot of expertise in our community, right? Our venture community was go, go, go. And so we put up valuations on great companies to stupid levels. Doesn't mean they're not great companies. It means they raise money at really dumb levels. That has implications for employees who got their options set at $8 billion valuation at a company that now is probably worth $2 billion. And so how do you retain employees? And so there's a whole digestive process that has to go through that will take time. Is it 18 months? Is it 6 months? There is a process that things have to hit an equilibrium. The good news is there's 10 billion plus of venture capital And it'll be
Right.
interesting to see who can sit patiently like they should versus it burns a hole in my pocket.
Yeah, that's what really it's that $10 billion number, the amount of capital that came in and is effectively committed, even locked up to this investment thesis that did not exist in 2018 at
Yeah.
all, right?
But
I
but
mean,
remember, we
we were a
came
decently sized fund with 20 million back then,
right.
my, where I worked.
We came down though from like, we had a close to a $4 trillion market cap, right?
Yeah,
And now we're 600 billion or 800 billion or something.
right.
I don't even want to look. Um, and so 10 billion is a lot, but it was, this became a really big industry,
Yeah,
and you're going to see a rationalization.
yeah,
That's not a terrible thing. Actually, the best companies are built in times of turmoil, and you have to do some analysis of like, where do we screw up? What are the way every company, including ours, messed up was, well, I very much talked about Bitcoin being 80 vol or 100 vol asset. And if you're a 100 vol asset, there's a 2/3 chance you're at 0 or you're at 2 if you start at 1 in a year. That's what 100 vol means.
right,
Um, None of us planned our businesses. We might have planned our market rate trading around that concept, but we didn't plan our business growth around that. And so, what does
right,
that mean practically? It means at the end of last year, if Bitcoin was 50,000, you probably should have planned your business around a Bitcoin of 30,000, not a 50, right? Like, because there's such a chance you could
right,
get there. We knew the Fed was starting to hike rates. We knew there was a headwind. We knew the tail was adoption. The adoption's still there. One of the promising data points we've gotten in the last 5-6 weeks is as we visited accounts in Europe and in the US, the institutions that aren't backing away, right? So
right.
you're going to see some pretty big commitments from people, both as investors and as builders, because no one doesn't think the world won't have more digital assets in 5 years than it has now.
Right.
Tokenized funds, tokenized real estate, Bitcoin, unique digital assets on blockchains and metaverse, healthcare records. And so any sophisticated bank or investor I know believes in that. What's the path? What are the right bets? Much more complicated.
Yeah. It's sort of like if you hear this said sometimes, if you like Bitcoin at 50K, you should love it at 19K where we are right now, right? If assuming you were doing your work, like and actually loving it, not just riding a momentum
Well,
train.
but one of the lessons for everybody is you're either a value investor, Warren Buffett, but once a stock starts trading over 20 times PE, a 70 PE stock, when you're trading at growth, you're a momentum investor, nothing else. You're a macro guy.
Yeah.
And you can fool yourself, but like in the 2000s, you couldn't have said, or the 99s, I'm a tech investor fundamentally. No, it was all, wildly high PEs or even Google. Now, FANG is a value play, right?
Right.
I think Facebook trades at
They're
8
low.
times or something.
Right.
And so you can look at it differently. There was no value play in crypto, not one, right? It was momentum. Bitcoin is the closest one you could have argued because you could have looked at it versus gold and adoption, but everything else was a play on the future. And we had no real way to know what valuation meant. You could look at relative valuation. I used to say this looks really cheap versus Cardano, but it was people buying into this dream. And I think the next time up, why it's going to be harder work is we don't have and I'm not saying we won't have speculomania again, right? Humans love to speculate, love to gamble. It's part of our DNA. But we're not going to have COVID, and we're not going to have a Fed saying we're going to give everybody money. And so the preconditions for the wild bull market that we had aren't going to exist for a while. And so you're going to have to tell a story based on shit that works.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, another question here, and it goes along these same lines. And you're expecting, to be clear, the Fed will pause and blink, right? because they'll get inflation under control and then there will be
No,
other issues? Is that
I think there's going to be this amazing tension. So right now, everyone in politics is talking about inflation, right? It dominates.
right?
55% of what people are going to vote around is inflation, and it's all Biden's fault because he's the president. Um, you know, that's just the way politics works.
Yeah, it's the economy, stupid.
In September, my belief is all anyone's going to talk about is recession. We are literally going to shift the narrative from inflation to recession. Inflation's still going to be high,
Yeah,
but it's going to be coming down. Even today's PCE number is a little lower than last month's. We might have one more high CPI print, but then even base effects are going to make it come down. But the economy is slowing. Crude oil is a short here, not a long. You see it in commodity prices. Like we
right.
and so there's going to be this tension between a plunging economy, which wants you to cut rates, let alone not raise them, and Powell needing to get the credibility of the Fed back and bash inflation expectations down. Not just inflation. And you see break evens in fixed income have collapsed. And so
Right.
most likely scenario for me is the Fed hikes in July, hikes in August, and maybe pauses or gives a small hike in September and then says, hey, we're going to wait. Like that would give the macro story back to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Again, we first have to get through the rest of this deleveraging, right? And so we're not there yet, right?
Yeah.
When you read about people getting bailed out, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Do you think, Mike, just given how coupled Fed policy is with the success of financial markets these days, right? How interventionist they've been, this massive liquidity injection that led to a huge everything bubble, and now sort of pulling that liquidity away, because they have to fight inflation. Is that I don't know if it's the question is the proper role for a central bank. It seems like they definitely wouldn't want this to be their role. But
No,
also, does this
no,
strengthen
so-
the argument for Bitcoin in general, like both the increase and
listen,
the
if you want to
retraction?
be really simple about Bitcoin is anti-populists and governments tend towards populism, right? Why does it? Capitalism tends towards inequality and governments are there to then fight inequality in lots of ways. And so it's not the Fed's fault solely. The Fed,
Right.
it's Congress's fault. It's Donald Trump's fault for running the biggest increase in government spending in history before COVID, right?
Yeah.
He took government spending from 3 trillion to 3.9 trillion before COVID, when we had the greatest economy of all time. And when asked who's going to
Yeah.
pay for it, he said, someone else can worry about it. Like, that's fact. I'm not making that up.
Right.
Then Biden took over and said, hey, it's the progressives' time to use COVID to get our social policy done. And so that first $1.8 trillion stimulus bill wasn't needed. Fucking so much wasted in PPE in the schools and schools wanting to use it on shit they cared about, like books. Nope, got to buy more masks. And so there was this bizarre shift of more money. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for Joe Manchin, we'd had another, trillion odd dollars in the Build Back Better bill. And I'm all for politicians listening to their people and making, decisions based on what they run on. It's got to be done in a context of prudent fiscal policy. And starting with Trump, we threw prudent fiscal policy out the window. We had a surplus with Clinton's last term. We went from a big deficit when Reagan took over to a surplus. And then we had this kind of neoliberalism in politics until Trump. And, Trump got elected as a populist, right? The people at the bottom, 60%, felt like capitalism wasn't working for them. And so they picked Trump. And then they flipped back and they picked left. And, we're going to windshield wiper back and forth until there's a new narrative that actually works for lots of people. And so that's why Bitcoin was invented originally, right, as the response to this coming. And so I do think trusting, in math, trusting in code, having a monetary policy that is literally built into the code that's really rational, right? It's a deflationary or anti-inflationary monetary policy.
Right.
It wouldn't
Incredibly
work.
neutral.
It wouldn't work if we didn't have populist governments. If we had a really prudent government, why do you need Bitcoin? He built it because he knows governments tend towards populism, and we're in that phase now. Listen, AOC could become the president, right? She's a populist. She's smart. She's effective. She's got a view. She represents a whole lot of people that feel left out of the system. Really, she's the mirror to Donald Trump, just a lot more gracious and more articulate, But we're not in the center. Our politics aren't in the center. There's no fiscal prudence. And again, I look at Joe Manchin, who, my progressive friends and were really angry at for lots of reasons. In some ways, he's the hero of this story. Otherwise, we'd have been in more shape. And so we need adults back in the room. Because it's going to be hard to, I think Bitcoin has a pretty big future. Even think about what happened in the Supreme Court. You had 3 justices who sat there in their confirmation, and I wouldn't call them liars because they didn't actually lie. They were cheeky, though. It's settled, case law. Okay, that's what they said. It was settled case law. They unsettled it.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
That breaks down trust. It just does. And so as we have trust breakdown in institutions, and I'm not, saying that to be inflammatory, you can tell it because you just read on Twitter that half the people don't trust them anymore. And so when the court is less trusted, it's where Satoshi's innovation is so important. You don't need to trust us. It's in the system, right? It's trust in the code. And that, I think, makes me kind of big picture much more bullish this idea.
This was great, Mike. I think you covered a lot of awesome topics. I totally agree with you on Bitcoin as sort of an exemplary, untrusting, code-based system for bring truth into the world without having to rely on these things. I guess the final question I would ask is, in the next, maybe, you've talked about rates over the next, 3-4 months. What does the summer look like in your mind? I mean, people used to say sell in May and go away. It doesn't.
We all
look
wish
like
we
volatility.
did. We all wish we did.
I know.
Jesus Christ.
It doesn't look like volatility is going down anytime soon. Are people going to be trading from the beach? I mean, is it?
No, I think you're probably wrong there. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see volumes in vol slow down.
Yeah.
And you'll have market vol, but you're going to have less excitement as people dust themselves off and try to understand what their new reality is. Like when markets are falling as fast as they are, everyone is unsettled, right? The stock I own in my company is worth less. Oh, my PA investment is worth less. Oh, that's worth less. Oh, do I have? So there's this unsettling. You need the market to get settled. You need individuals to get settled. Okay, I got fired. I didn't get fired. This is what my balance sheet looks like. I can pay my rent. Like, that takes the anxiety down. That takes volatility down. And that happens naturally in every cycle. And so I do think we will get to that point. The interesting news for the 18-month, 2-year view is there's a pretty interesting scenario where things are collapsing now and the Fed pauses. This is what happened in 1974. And they might even cut, and then inflation could take right back off. Yeah. We don't understand, you're a lot younger than me. You don't understand inflation because you've never lived through it. I didn't really live through it. I got the tail end. When I got to Wall Street, rates were 9% on their way straight down. But I wasn't a student of markets in the 70s. And so what creates inflation expectations in people is complicated, right? Part of it's already built in the system, right? 16% of union jobs now have wages tied to CPI. So if CPI is 7%, I get 7% plus 1%.
Yeah.
Like that. And so the German labor unions used to have all of that. That's why the Germans were so cautious about inflation expectations. They lived through Weimar. Right. And so we're hoping Powell hits the silver hammer on the inflation head and it goes right back down into its little box, and you run the jack in the box, it doesn't pop its ugly head. But there's an easy scenario that says everyone thinks the jack in the box is back in the box, and all of a sudden he pops right back up, and you're like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
We've got inflation again. So I think this is going to be a really, really interesting, 24 months in macro. It's going to be challenging running businesses. But I think the rationale of why we got into this business, from Bitcoin maxis to people who really believe in decentralized systems and unique digital assets, like that's not going away. Navigating to where that's going to be in 2 years is going to be the companies, the CEOs, the teams that can do that are going to feel really good about themselves and make great wealth, and others are going to run into rocks and crash into the shoreline. It's not going to be nearly as easy as the last 24 months where we all look like Superman.
You could throw a dart. Okay, I don't know. Do you want to cover anything else, Mike? I mean, I think that's good for me.
For the last day of the worst 6 months I've suffered in a long time, I'm going to call it a day.
It is.
I'm going to grab a cigar.
It is.
I'm going to take a shot of either Havana Club or Hibiki 21, and
it's been a wild 6 months. I can't believe it's June 30th today. You're right.
Yeah, it does feel
crazy.
It does
crazy
feel like
year so far.
I think I've lost my voice in this whole thing. All right, Alex, thanks a ton. All good. Sorry I talked
You too,
so
Mike.
much. Yep, be well.
No, this was great, dude. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yep.